Okay, well, hello and welcome to my presentation. I'm sorry for all of you that logged in last week. I think it was only last week and weren't able to access the presentation when I was in the room. We were having technology difficulties, but I thought this might be a better way to present the information anyway for those of you who couldn't make it down to Hobart to hear me give this talk. So this research is about caregivers' perspectives on having children with disabilities, and this is one subset of the data about parents' advice or parents' comments on about around schooling, basically. So to talk about the research broadly, um, this this research came out of work that I was doing with an early intervention service. As you would all know, early intervention services are really an educational priority for Australian children with developmental delays and disabilities. Well, actually, for all Australian children. And this is because the brain is just so malleable in those early years. And it's really a way that we can impact cognitive development, brain development for young children. And the government gets bigger bang for their buck, right? Money spent in these early years is likely to have a bigger impact than money spent in later years. So I started this research. I was interested in broadly understanding the experience of children, of families of children with disabilities in the Northern Territory, and the way that families, caregivers, parents experience the transitions between the health system and the school system and the therapy systems in between. I was interested in research. I was interested in supports and hindrances as families have to navigate these different systems. And really, what made me think about doing this research and set it up was because of an experience where a child was born in the hospital. The child had Down syndrome, and the doctor called the early intervention service to say, hey, this child was born today, we'll refer them over next week. And I was thinking about what it would mean to have those seamless relationships between these different services. So I started this research 2 years ago, and I've moved into a second round of interviews with these families, so post 2 years. And actually, a lot has changed in the Northern Territory in the past 2 years around early intervention services, and that's mainly because NDIS is in now. No one talked about NDIS really in the first set of interviews because we didn't know anything, and now most of the families have NDIS plans. Sorry, my voice is a bit funny. Actually, I have a cold that I got on the flight back. One more point is none of the images in this presentation are children who participated in the study. They're either children whose parents have given me permission to share their images or Creative Commons images or from iStock. So through this research, I sought to understand caregiver perspectives about their and lived experiences about having a child with disabilities. And I wanted to give our caregivers an opportunity to share and discuss the issues and challenges they've had to face in interactions with health and education systems and around service provision gaps. After all, I live in Darwin, so many of these families live in Darwin. There are definitely gaps. There are definitely wait lists and what this means to families when they have these experiences. I was also interested in the themes that arise across caregiver narratives to inform the professions and help clinicians, teachers, organisations, and schools to better tailor services to families. So, if we don't know what the issues are, if we don't have the voices of families in our research, it's very hard to make changes that might suit them. I'm a narrative inquirer, so that means I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm really interested in stories and thinking about stories. And in the case of families, the stories of children in their lives of families, families interacting with their communities. What are the stories that they're telling about themselves and their experiences as they interact with the world around them? So this work is really about the individual's truth or perspective. I don't believe there is one firm truth and that this research is going to dig that out. I think that there are obviously lots of different truths about some of these things. So I'm not looking for facts about schools, teachers, systems, or services. I'm looking at experiences. That doesn't mean some schools didn't come up more often than others in the research. I don't name any of the schools, obviously. And you would expect that, I would say, in a place of this size. So I used open-ended or conversational interviews. That means I came in with a list of interview questions, and sometimes I went down the list and I asked all the questions. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes families had things they wanted to talk to me about. Sometimes the conversation went off in a different direction, and that's okay. Snowball sampling. So initially, I sent out an invite to all the families that were receiving services at an early intervention service. And then later, families started contacting me and saying that they wanted to meet and they wanted to talk about their kids. And then we do the analysis. It's a thematic analysis, which in this case means you take all these interviews that have been transcribed and put them into NVivo, and then we start reading through them and looking for themes. Or the old-fashioned way, and sometimes I just really like this way too, you print them all out, you cut the things up into strips, and then you group them together in like categories. Okay, so there were 40 families. In this study, I did 40 interviews, 2 interviews with both parents, 38 interviews with one parent. There was one foster carer, one grandmother, both primary carers. The foster carer had this child and other children for some time. Because the parent is the participant in the research, not the child per se. This is why I was able to include a foster carer. 8 fathers, 32 mothers, and these 40 families had 48 children or teens with diagnoses. Okay, so 8 families had 2 children with diagnoses. There were 2 sets of twins in the study, and 39 of the families were in Darwin or Palmerston, 1 in Alice Springs. Of the 48 children, teens in the study, 12 were females, 36 were males. We might expect this actually, because 4 times as many boys have ASD. Boys are twice as likely to have an intellectual disability. We do see a lot more boys in special education. So the age range of children was 4 months to 14 years. This is a huge range, and the older kids really came in with that snowball sampling. So obviously they weren't the ones I initially reached out to in the early intervention service. Nonetheless, the average age was 5 years, 9 months. And I always asked parents, tell me something about your child. Tell me something that you'd really want us to know. What are some of your favorite things about your child? Adjectives that parents use: delightful, lovely, clever, adorable, such a great kid, cheeky, happy, very loved by his family. And I include these here because I think sometimes as educators and researchers, people who are writing about children with disabilities, we forget that these children are the light of someone's life. We tend to get focused on the things that we're either trying to fix, unfortunately, or unfortunately, because I think that this is really a mindset. We get fixed on the adjustments we've got to make, the accommodations we've got to make, rather than remembering, you know, this child has differences, and this child also has some lovely qualities. Okay, so the diagnoses in this group of children: 1 had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, 31 had autism spectrum disorders, 1 had cerebral palsy, 5 had Down syndrome, 5 had global developmental delay or other. So they might have been young, they might have still had a failure to thrive diagnosis. One of the children had a trauma diagnosis. Someone had a speech disorder, but I think there were probably more things going on. And then 5 children had other genetic disorders, chromosomal deletions. One child had cleft palate, but also other, it wasn't an isolated cleft lip and palate. The cleft palate was, I believe, a symptom of many other things that were going on with this child in utero development. So another thing to think about with this population is because of the way I initially recruited through an early intervention service, in order to be eligible for that early intervention service, you had to be at the first percentile on 3 or more domains. So a domain might have been receptive language, expressive language, fine motor development, cognitive development, gross motor development. So you had to have a delay in 3 of those areas. And being at the first percentile is quite a significant delay, which means that the children I was accessing were really had significant disabilities. These weren't children that had like an articulation delay, for example. So despite starting this research in early intervention service, most of the families, it's got a little weird tick. Go back. Most of the families had children enrolled in schools and were interacting with the Northern Territory Department of Education in some ways. This is also because families of children in early intervention, they're tapped into the system. So it means that by the time their child turned 3, even though obviously 3 is a before school age, they would be connected with student services. Student services would know that they're coming along. Student services might have met the family, might be doing an assessment, or they might be heading towards preschool and trying to determine what is the best school environment for these kiddos. I have to say that of all the data, really what parents wanted to talk about was school. So I had initially started this interested in early intervention services, interested in therapeutic services, and a bit worried because I'm in a college of education that my dean might not think this was really relevant research. And in fact, families really wanted to talk about schools. And I would say overwhelmingly, I found, as I listened to these stories, that teachers and administrators in schools make life much easier, or they make it much harder for families. It should be noted that many of the children in this study were in special schools, and their parents love these schools, which for me, I feel like I'm promoting inclusive education, and it's quite confronting then how many parents really advocate for those special school environments. When children are in mainstream school, parents worry most about friendships. They want their children to have friends. They want this badly. This is really where parental attention goes. Okay, so as I said, the range of children was 4 months to 14 years. Average age was 5 years, 9 months. 14 of the kids were in special schools. 21 were in mainstream public schools. And this does not mean so if they're in a mainstream public school, they're in a mainstream classroom all day. These are not, the word is escaping me. These are not satellite classrooms of special schools in mainstream public schools. If that makes sense, I've classed all those kids under the special school category. One of the children was in a private school, one was in Steiner, 3 were in Catholic, 2 were in childcare, and 6 were not at school yet. So they were the littlies. So this is just one subset of the data, right? So I'm only looking at here the 67 times in the data that families talked about school. Okay, so this is about schools, school administrators, teachers, anything to do with schools went into this category. It's iterative coding, which means if you think about those little bits of paper I talked about, those cut up strips of things parents have said, I had put them in my categories. And then someone else came along and had a look and said, well, I think it goes like this. And then we talked about it and negotiated, and then we redeveloped the category. So you might start with a lot of categories, and then you narrow them down to quite specific categories. Okay. Overall, there were positive comments, there were negative comments, and there were neutral comments. The positives definitely exceeded the negatives, and the positive and the neutral combined well exceeded the negatives. And I point this out because sometimes people have responded to me about this research as if this was an opportunity for parents to really just complain. And my point is that just wasn't the tone or the the major response from most parents, actually, as you'll see. Okay, so I'm going to talk through 6 categories here that I put all the data into. So firstly, the biggest code. Number 1, parents want us to understand and get to know their children. Okay, 33% of the codes were about this topic. I collapsed another code into this that where a parent had talked about having higher expectation for her child's learning, because really what she was saying when it came down to it was they wanted the teacher to know that this child could do more. They didn't feel like they understood him and were pushing him harder. So here are some of the things that parents said. It's just seeing the child as a whole individual, really, and looking for their strengths as well as their challenges. Find out the child's likes, their dislikes, and what their tells are before they start to escalate. If he hurts himself, he doesn't cry, so just keep a closer eye on him. Most of the time he got left alone there. This parent was really worried about this child hurting himself in the classroom. She just didn't understand him, and I thought if he goes to school and he gets a teacher who's not as understanding, they're going to be so worried about his behaviour that academically he's not going to really get anything out of it. Okay. All these parents, what they're talking about is being able to recognise who the child is and what's going on with their child. So the second code, I call it educated qualities and attributes. And I want to say that in this instant, this was really about teacher attitudes. Parents really had this idea about good teachers versus bad teachers. And as I said, it wasn't about whether the teacher was skilled or not. It was about how likable they were. There's some research that said, I remember from back in the day, that doctors in America get sued not based on whether they're a skilled doctor or not a skilled doctor, but whether or not they have good bedside manner. Bad doctors with good bedside manner did not get sued as often as excellent doctors with bad bedside manners. Does that make sense? Whether it's a teacher or a doctor, we want that connection. We want that someone to be likable. Teachers, parents really had this idea of getting lucky. This came up a lot. Oh, I was really lucky this year. I got the good teacher. We've been lucky both years. And I think it's something that we really need to think about, this idea that it's lucky to get a good teacher or lucky to get a likable teacher, because really, I would have thought it's a basic right under the way our public education system is set up that you don't have to be lucky to have a good teacher. You should have a good teacher. So some of the things parents said: she's amazing. She's got that right balance of teacher, but also friend to the students. I think she's lovely. And so a really good school, especially as a preschool teacher. She was really, really good, fantastic. The teacher was amazing. There's another parent said, have more compassion, have faith in the child's ability. I don't like the way she talks to kids. They're really compassionate, just a lot of empathy. And you could see the connection here at times with understanding their child. Okay, the third code, most popular code, communicate with families. His teacher now, she's really good, and I talk to her. I'm always talking with the teacher in the morning to see how his day went in the afternoon, just to know how he's going. And this mum came in every morning and asked how yesterday had gone, and felt like he got she got an update about her child. One parent said, teachers forget my child can't answer my questions. If they don't tell me, I don't know what's going on at school. Um, Parents wanted to be listened to. They were fine if teachers didn't have all the answers. They were happy for teachers to say, "Hey, you know a lot about this diagnosis. Can you tell me what some strategies that work for you at home, or can you tell me some strategies that are likely to work for your child?" Um, Parents understand that you've got lots of kids in the class, not just their child. But of course, you know, that's their person, that's their human. They really want to know what's going on with their kiddos. And another person said asking teachers and childcare workers to have the hard conversations with families. And I think that this is something we really need to think about. One of the parents told a story how she come to Darwin, and someone said, I think your child's got autism, and then they started a 2-year process around diagnosis. It really does take 2 years for some families in Darwin with wait lists and access to services. And so the family called back to where they'd lived before, and she asked the prior teacher, we've been going through this diagnostic process, and I just wonder, did you notice anything? And the teacher said, oh yeah, we totally did. Yeah, we actually we thought he had autism. And the mum was quite cross. She said, well, why didn't you say anything? And of course, they hadn't said anything because people don't want to hurt people's feelings. They often don't want to have those hard conversations. But I think we need to remember if you're teaching in a 3-year-old classroom, or if you're teaching in a transition classroom, you have a lot of experience with that one age in particular. You know what 3-year-olds can do, or you know what 5-year-olds can do, and you know what 6-year-olds can do because you might have seen, 80 of them over the last few years. And when you see a child and you think, oh, they're not doing lots of things other children their age are doing, and you're wondering why, that is a good conversation to have with parents. I notice this. What do you think about this? Um, Rather than avoiding that conversation and what that conversation might mean. Okay, so number 4, specific advice for teachers. And I think the specific advice for teachers category was really about teacher knowledge and skill around diagnoses, managing behavior, professional development. Someone said probably they need to learn about autism. There should be some training because it's so common. Someone else said, I think it's part of their job. Everyone here is aware of autism, what it is. They thought it was pretty all right, the training. One parent said, patience. People need to give my child time. Just give them time. We need to slow down. And I really heard that come through. Speak quietly, speak clearly, keep it simple, come down to their level. And another parent said, just because you've got kids with special needs doesn't mean you don't have a good class. There's nothing wrong with kids with special needs. And this parent had had an experience where she'd been sitting at lunch with 2 of her children, both had special needs. They'd been out in public, in a mall, and at the table next to them, an adult came by and said to a woman sitting down eating lunch, how's your class this year? Um, and the woman, obviously a teacher, said, oh, it's great. I don't have any kids with special needs this year. It's a really good class. And the mum was was offended, and she was offended, and she was sad that her kids had to hear a teacher say, a class is good if you don't have them in it, basically. And I think we really need to be attentive to the way that we talk about these things in public, and the way that we talk about these things in general, actually. Okay, so these are the main codes that we got from parents. There was also a code about choice, a lot less in number, and it was about school choice and genuine choice. So I feel like the conversation about choice is ripe right now with the NDIS. It's built on the premise that individuals should have choice. Um, in this top segment, the story was, I felt the principal was pushing me. The parents had come to the principal of a mainstream school, and then there was a special education school not far away, and the principal really wanted the child to go to the special education school. And the parents said, I felt like he was pushing me, that was in the too hard basket. They just wanted to transfer me and say, that school's going to be much better for your child. And they did go and have a look, but they did want to put him in mainstream school, and they did put him in mainstream school. Ultimately, he didn't last very long in mainstream school. He didn't last very long because of an open plan classroom. It was really too much for him. He was in a room that basically had 40 transition children in one space, and didn't like it. Just was starting to refuse to come in from the playground and not liking school. And so the parents transferred him to the special school. And this was going to be a child that if he was in the mainstream school, he was going to need a lot of additional support, and the curriculum would have had to be adapted so that he could access it. Another thing about choice is this family was talking about open plan classrooms. There are a lot of open plan primary schools, and they said, look, they're not suitable acoustically for my child that's deaf. So were moving into the territory. They basically called around all the schools, figured out the school layouts, what schools were open plan, and then made a short list of schools that they thought would work for the child. And the husband literally went around and interviewed principals about questions they had and what they thought would be most appropriate, and they chose a school this way. And I think that's one of the flexibilities in the territory, that families of children with diagnoses do have, there are more accommodations in terms of which primary school they want to attend. And then another one of the choice codes was a parent who was very frustrated. Why is she even in their class? Is there some other class? There's no place for her. And feeling like none of the options that they were being offered were particularly good for their child. And the 6 is just like 3 outlier codes that didn't think went into any of the other categories. So someone said, I think schools are under-resourced, staffing wise. Someone said, I don't know, I hate teachers. What would I tell them? And I always note here that she's a teacher. And then a third one, stop the birthday parties with the rubbish foods. It's a no-brainer. We need less of this junk food in school. So I pulled this data out because I wanted teachers to know that parents are appreciative of their efforts. They really, really are. As I said, this was a study into early intervention, and family wanted to talk about schools and teachers. And if I asked families, well, who was your speech therapist or who was your therapist there? Oftentimes they could not tell me. They couldn't come up with a name. When I asked, well, who was your teacher there? Parents did know who their teacher was. And obviously you have a teacher for a year. But often when they talked about teachers, they did actually talk about them by name. Schooling is such a big issue for families. One of the parents said, it's such a relief because if school doesn't work, nothing else works. If she's anxious about one thing, everything else is a lot harder. So it's really important that it went well, and it had. And this was a family whose child was going to mainstream school, and she had a diagnosis, and it was going to require a lot of specific accommodations around her needs. And this mum said, we got to the meeting, I sat down at the table, they asked me such good questions, they were ready. They said, what can we do to make this work? And then they did those things. And for this mum, she was just unbelievably grateful for that. Okay. Parents indicate that they want teachers to know and understand their child. Parents want schools to communicate with them about their child, both the good and bad. They don't want you to just call up and say, you need to come and pick up your daughter. She's been up a tree for the last hour. They really want you to tell them when things are going well as when they're having struggles in the classroom. They don't have rose-colored glasses about their child, and they understand their child is one of many. No one, except for that one code, no one is asking for more. No one said we need more technology, more teachers, bigger classrooms, more class sizes. No one did. They said, I want you to know my child. I want you to be nice to them. I want you to communicate with me. Okay? Parents generally appreciate teachers, principals, and their efforts. So the things that parents are asking for: respect, understanding, communication, time, interest in their child, high expectations, seeing potential. These are relatively malleable variables which cost nothing in financial terms. There's no reason why we can't do this all the time. Many of the things that that impact schools are structural, they're financial. Every time we have a change of government, everything changes. Um, these things aren't financial. These things, it doesn't matter who's in government. We can be nice to kids. We can be nice to families. We can respect families. We can understand their children. Okay? This is a shift of attitude and practice, and this should be easy. I recognize that it's not easy, but it should be easy. Parents want to see teachers thinking about getting to know their child, and when they do see it, then they're in support of educators. This is what it really means when we connect with families. And teachers and principals who made time, who communicated with parents and created a welcoming environment were liked. And really all schools could do this. Oops. Oh. And that's the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me at my CDU email address. I'm just going to end with a quote that I loved. My favorite school quote was, we're lucky. At his school, they're wonderful. They know him now. They can see he's a bright boy, and his teacher is just, she's never allowed to leave. In fact, we're going to have to make sure she's his teacher forever until year 12. I don't care if she's only doing early childhood or lower primary. She's going to have to pick up some skills on the way. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to hearing from you with any comments.